So basically what I'm going to try and do is talk about this blending of our solutions, trying to bring together the motivational interviewing piece and the medication piece, and seeing what we can do to kind of help understand how we could bring those together to best help our patients. Now, this isn't anything new to any of you. All of you know that traditionally our alcohol dependence treatment really has been spiritually, psychologically, social principles of change are based on those. However, we have had, and more recently, and I think we will have, real advances in understanding brain chemistry and understanding how the brain works, and new developments in pharmacology. So we need to be aware of those as well, and to add, I think, a little more of the biological component to our treatment, especially of alcohol dependence, which is our topic today, but that's true in a number of areas. Remember that what makes addictions really complicated is that there is psychological, biological, spiritual, and social dimensions of these addictions. So recovery really needs to address all of those dimensions. And the treatment plan and what we do with them, people needs to sit firmly on these four critical factors. We have had, we do have, luckily, we have treatments, and we have strategies, and we have programs that actually address all of these four components. In the psychological, we have the cognitive behavioral, we have motivational enhancement, you have contingency management. In the social, we have mutual help, community reinforcement, social support. We have a number of those aspects there. We have spiritual dimension somewhat covered. People have the 12 steps. There's also personal, spiritual, and religious activities that people engage in. And at the biological level, we clearly have always used some of the detox process. We've had disulfiram for a long while, and now we have some new pharmacotherapies. So treatment success really depends on the alcohol-dependent individual kind of getting access and ways to engage kind of the critical recovery factors. A key factor in recovery, however, is always motivation, the person's motivation to change the behavior. So we have to keep that also at the kind of center and the focus of what we're trying to do. In Project Match, as I told you, those of you who were here the other day, we found that motivation really had an impact. Motivation as they walked in the door had an impact all the way through the 12 months, the first 12 months of follow-up, and out through 3 years for the outpatients. So we know that motivation is an important dimension. The other thing that we know is that our options really have expanded. Now, I've been in the field for longer than 15 years, but I'd say over the past 15 years, partially as part of the work that I've done and others, Bill Miller and lots of other people in the field, we've had our treatment options expanded. The motivation issue and stages of change have really helped us enable us to kind of move away from where we were when I came into the field, which was really kind of a disease of denial, resistance. We must attack these folks because they don't understand what's going on with them, to really understand it and intervene earlier with them. Advances in treatment techniques, the cognitive behavioral treatments have really expanded our treatment focus. There has been greater use across the board of mutual help and 12-step programs incorporated into lots of our treatments. And so we are building kind of the social dimension into more and more of our treatment. And finally, there's these new medications that give access to really making some impact on the biological mechanisms of alcohol and drug abuse. So we do have, I think, lots of tools in front of us. And we talked last year, I think, for those of you who were at in Burbank, we talked a little bit about the tools and trying to build the toolbox. This program is really going to focus on some new tools that may not be new to some of you, but maybe to others, but probably trying to bring them together, maybe the new part, utilizing motivational treatment interventions and focusing on some of the motivational interviewing stuff, and then including pharmacotherapy in the treatment plan. hopefully if you could do these together, we can encourage our patients to initiate and sustain long-term behavior change. I mean, that's the goal for all of us. Now, if you look, especially here at the bottom, you'll see that really we've had disulfiram has been around a long time, antabuse, and it's been there. But recently, since 1994, when naltrexone was allowed to be an FDA-approved pharmacotherapy, we've had Camprol, acamprosate, and now we have the extended release naltrexone. So in the past 15 years or so, there's been a lot of expansion. Now you have an expanded chart of this in your folder. So you actually have side effects and other kinds of things in the folder. You have a laminated chart that really goes through this. But each of these has a different mechanism of the way it works. And each of them has ways that they block opioid receptors here, reduce activity of glutamate, so that they have different effects. And we need to understand that and work with not only the effects that they have, these are the primary effects. I mean, they have side effects too. We sometimes over-focus on the side effects and forget to focus on the primary effects. But these medications are now approved for the treatment of alcohol dependence. So the clinical trials have really shown that these pharmacotherapies, when combined with psychosocial treatments, can really help reduce the quantity and frequency of drinking in alcohol-dependent patients. But they're not magic bullets. And if you heard the two testimonials in the beginning, you heard both of those women talk about the medications giving them access to their ability and giving them the freedom to actually engage more with their meetings, to engage more with their treatments. So these aren't magic bullets that you take this medication and you're fine. They really need to be incorporated into a larger program. However, they can be highly effective tools to help people to maintain sobriety, but also possibly to initiate treatment and engage in treatment. So you know, the question is, how can these medications designed to manage brain chemistry help people to get into recovery? And that's the real question, I think, for all of us to address. So we need to do the connection between medication and motivation and try to understand how those two things going together really could make an impact in the patient's life. So those of you who, this is part of the rerun part, who have saw me on Thursday, you know, we know, how do people change? Well, people change when they become interested or concerned about a need. They become convinced that the change is in their best interest and it will benefit them more than it'll cost them. They organize some kind of plan of action that they are committed to implementing. They take the actions that are necessary. And if you say no to do any of these sound familiar, I failed miserably on Thursday. But obviously these look familiar, and we're going to kind of just go through them. These really are the issues around the stages of change. And remember we talked on Thursday, for those of you who were there, that it's not just the ability to kind of look at and say where people are, but each stage indicates the task that we need to be involved in to get people to move forward in this process. So if someone's in an early pre-contemplation stage where they are not seriously considering something, you've got to get them interested and concerned. Here you've got to get a risk-reward analysis, commitment and planning, implementation of the plan, consolidating. We're going to go through those again with the motivational interviewing piece in a minute. So change really requires the accomplishment of these multiple tasks outlined in each of the stages. It also requires the self-control strength and the ability to cope with challenges and barriers that can undermine any successful action. And this is also where you want to think about, you know, pharmacotherapy. If you listen to those two women, the pharmacotherapy really provided a platform that enabled them to use more of their self-control strength, which I think is really what we're looking to try and do. But clearly, change in any one of these areas requires focus. So you need motivation and you need the self-regulation. As we know, people typically don't move through this process in a single linear fashion. We don't tap you on the shoulder, you say, wait a minute, look, I think you've got an alcohol problem. You say, oh gosh, gee, I didn't think about that, let me see. You're right. And then they move on, they go into preparation, action, maintenance, and they change it completely. It would be nice if that happened, but that's not really the way it happens. It ends up being much more like this, where people kind of come in, they kind of go in, they cycle around, they move through, they go into relapse, they come back into preparation, they go back, and they cycle through this multiple times. As I told many of you, the Project Match folks that we did as outpatients, 45% of them had had previous inpatient treatment. And many had had multiple treatments before that. So we know that people cycle through this process multiple times. And so we need to kind of keep that in mind also as we go through. So like it or not, relapse happens and often accompanies behavior change. But they still need to kind of change. So somebody who's kind of gone back needs to come back through and figure it out. The challenge is, how can we help each of these people kind of complete each of the tasks well enough to get to the success, to get to successful recovery. And that's the challenge. Now, we also say a lot of times that why don't people change? Well, they're not motivated, they're not willing, as we said, they're not able, they don't see themselves as able to do this. So we need to really counter these with our approaches, with our strategies, with what we talk with these folks about. As I said, I mean, again, this is a little bit of a rerun, but people aren't not motivated. I mean, they're not unmotivated. They're really just not motivated to do what we want them to do. They're not ready to begin the behaviors that we think would be helpful. And it is true that this motivation really belongs to the patient. So you need to, again, understand that and underline that. However, we can help them. We can either enhance or hinder motivation. And that's part of what we'll be looking at. So the motivation piece is really kind of best viewed from my perspective as this process of change and the readiness of the patients to really get involved and to kind of complete each of these tasks. So we want people to have internal motivation. Many people come to treatment for external reasons and pressures. We really want internal motivation to help them. So your challenge is, how do you help people find internal motivation and make the decisions and take the actions that they need to do?